Oh, hi. You're after catching me in the middle of something. See, you have my bird cert right here. I'm just making some changes to it before I send it off to a rework, just to see if anything happens. Think it'll do anything if I change gender to Wii Balance Board? Mistakes! They happen to the best of us. Also the worst of us. Sometimes you mess up when making a game. That's just game development. But it may be something that doesn't get noticed until months or even years down the line. When this happens, simple changes usually aren't enough. And that's when you've got to book yourself in with the old reliable rework. And I mean, this is even something exclusive to games, like this happens to people as well. Why do you think HRT exists? Reworks. They've become commonplace in modern gaming, especially in competitive PvP games. Sometimes, simple balance changes aren't enough to keep a character in check. Maybe their design worked well in test environments but fell short upon reaching the public, so what do? Take them out back to show the other characters in your game what happens if they start acting up. So we may as well start here. What is a rework? Take a fucking guess. Any changes to a character that go beyond basic adjustments and swap up how their mechanics work at their smallest and at their largest, they create entirely new characters. You could think of them like the remakes, remasters, and re-releases of the live service side of gaming, and just like remakes, remasters, and re-releases, some are good, some are bad, and some I would also have into porn if my parents walked in because that's easier to explain than this. So I think there's about 3 different ways reworks can be received. The good, the bad, and the ha. There's one game that has all 3 and is also one of the oldest games I know of that has actually reworked its cast of characters, League of Legends. Now wait, listen, even if you hate this game, just hear me out. It's a great litmus test for reworks and it lets us get our groundwork laid. If you're familiar with League, you probably know of its golden child reworks, the reworks that are truly peak. The Pantheons, Warwicks, Nunus, Fiddlesticks, Volibears, Shens, all of them. They're great, but I'm not going to talk about them all, we'll be here all day. So who am I going to focus on? The best one. No bias at all, I've got no idea what you're on about. So before we talk about the details of Warwick, what makes a good rework? To me, it depends on the goal of the rework and the game, but typically, modernizing the gameplay of the character, be it from altering how their old mechanics work and introducing new mechanics to replace the old, or just removing the problematic mechanics they previously had that resulted in the need for the rework are all solid methods. But the most important thing is to make sure that they still live up to the gameplay and feel of their original version. In certain cases, that may not be possible, like just take a look at Old Scion and tell me how you turn that into a functioning champion. So how does Warwick match up into this? Well, Old Warwick was a juggernaut, which in Old League means an auto-attack focused bruiser. His whole shtick was that he smacked a lot and healed by smacking, and that was it really. Which was fine, back then at least, until one item broke him, say the Devourer. Without spending too much time on this, Old Warwick would click 2 buttons, Devourer Red Smite and Alt, which was point and click, and you would just die from being shredded by on-hit effects. While it didn't quite cause his rework, it was definitely the catalyst that led to Riot deciding he needed an update. His rework had the goal of turning him into a champ with higher skill expression, adding counterplay, while keeping his previous style of essentially being the poster child for League's Drain Tank archetype alive. And also making him look like he just wouldn't hurt to step on if he was made out of Lego, but that's not really important here. And it was a massive success. Old Warwick was one of the release League champs with an extremely basic kit. His auto attacks dealt some extra damage that he would heal from, his Q dealt damage that he would heal from, his W was attack speed for him and his teammates, and his E gave vision on anyone within range if they were below half HP, and you've seen that old ultimate, a suppress that does damage and heals Warwick. But the rework retains all of these elements flawlessly while also creating an actual gameplay loop that isn't just brutalizing people. The passive is the same but has an extra layer of spice, healing him when below half HP and tripling that healing when below 25%. This alone, plus a certain summoner spell, has gotten me things that I cannot say without a lawyer present to prove that I am quoting an individual and not saying this myself. His Q is also very similar, while still doing damage and healing based off it, but it was given a choice when being used. Tapping will be a fast bite, but you can hold to dash through enemies to get to their other side. But naturally, the best thing about this is that while you follow enemies through anything, and I do mean anything, the new W combines the old W and E into one. If an enemy is below half HP, Warwick can smell them, getting move speed in their direction, attack speed if attacking them, and of course, the best part, he can see a blood trail to their location. I've spoken about my love for this ability at length, and nothing has changed since then. Chasing people at Mach 9 is never gonna not be fun. His E was entirely new, serving 2 purposes, either helping you tank damage just a little bit longer in order to heal using the damage reduction that it grants, or serving as a way to combo with your Q in order to send enemies in the direction you want them to walk with a fear. And of course, the new ultimate being a skill shot and some tweaks to how its on hits worked, nearly fixed everything that was wrong with it originally. Mainly the fact that you couldn't do anything if Warwick pressed the button. If he decided you were getting ulted, that was that. And as you can see right here, this Perfection. A beautiful rework that keeps the spirit of the character alive, adds depth to their gameplay, and creates an actual gameplay loop, because God knows old Warwick needed one. You were able to remove your hands from the keyboard as old Warwick. However, just as there can be good reworks, there can be bad ones. As for what makes a bad one, well, to me, it's obviously the opposite of what makes a good one, but there's a little more to it than that, I would find. Obviously, if you fail to deliver on what was promised, yeah, no shit's gonna be a bad rework. You failed to do what you were supposed to do. If I ask for a pizza and you come out to me with a shepherd's pie, calling it pizza, I'd call that a pretty bad pizza. Anything can cause it to fail, be it from creating an absolute balanced nightmare, not even fixing the main problem the character previously had, fixing the problems that they previously had, resulting in new problems replacing them, or even just being a solid rework on the surface, but being handled poorly in general, resulting in the problems still existing, just not nearly as badly as they may have previously been. And of course, the biggest way that a rework could fail is by isolating the original players who played it. And I mean, there's so many examples that I could look at, but you know what? Let's use the most recent one, Skarner. One of the most wanted and anticipated reworks in recent years of League, facing multiple delays up to release. And what was the result? Good God. So what happened? Luckily, we don't need to go extremely in-depth on how his old or new kit works, since what they actually do isn't inherently the problem. So old Skarner. He was never a super popular character, largely thanks to his previous passive making him one of the most volatile characters in the game. His old passive, Crystal Spires, placed crystals around the map, acting as mini objectives. If Skarner or his team claimed one, he would gain big buffs while within their range, including increases to move speed, attack speed, and also a mana regen buff. This seems pretty innocuous until you look at his kit and his builds. His old Q heavily benefits from attack speed, as each auto reduces the cooldown by a second against champions, which really ramps up his damage. It even affects his E and his ult. The E benefits from attack speed, letting him get a stun off faster, and of course, Skarner wants as much move speed as possible so that he can kidnap people with his suppression. But this passive is a double-edged sword, because if you don't have access to your spires, you go from operating at 120% to 70%. There's no common ground for the old Skarner, which is why the majority don't like to play him. I mean, he was also pretty ugly, so that's not helping with League players being shallower than a kid's pool, but that doesn't matter right now. Despite this, old Skarner still had his core player base, largely thanks to his variety of builds. You could go bruiser, tank, move speed if you were feeling funny. There were options each game. But of course, having a character with a less than 1% pick rate whose extremely volatile gameplay loop doesn't make for the most popular character ever, which is also made worse by how it felt kind of frustrating honestly to play against Skarner when he had those Spire buffs, so he got voted for a rework by the community. And what happened? Oh, I know what this is. Nothing! When they first announced his abilities, no Skarner players were happy because he had nothing except max HP scalings. No AD, no AP. He was all in on HP scalings, completely removing any potential to experiment with builds before he was even released. Now this was changed, but it doesn't matter when the HP focused builds are so good, there's no point in even trying to experiment. But that by itself wouldn't make this a bad rework, at least not in my eyes. Ignoring his balance issues on release, let's look at his core strengths in mechanics in both versions. Previously, Skarner needed his Spires active to actually have impact, but he could just about manage without them if you were good enough. Old Skarner lived and died by his stats, yes, but he could control these stats. They were visible, massive crystals on the map for his entire team to make attempts to secure. Current Skarner is similar. He lives and dies by his stats, only not in the same way that the old Skarner did. Rework Skarner is just a stat stick. If he has enough numbers, he wins, and if he doesn't, he loses. Only he can't directly influence his stat gain like he previously could. It's not like his team can help with rotations to try and secure Spires like before, because they don't exist anymore. His new passive is just a stacking auto-attack based mark, no Spires to be found. Skarner needs stats to win, but if he doesn't get the gold, then there's nothing he can do about it. New Skarner completely removes what his previous players adored, even if there were very few of them, and just creates new problems that most players really dislike playing as, with, and against due to his reliance on shoveling stats down his throat in an attempt to activate the lower intestine buff. Now there's an extra piece of Skarner and his rework that can be argued, yeah, this probably contributes to why it feels pretty bad, being a complete and utter retcon of his lore, but I'm gonna be real with you lads, how many people were playing Skarner for lore? Because I think you could count them on your hands. But there's a third kind of reworked, one feared by unpopular character mains around the world. The reworks. These are, like the name suggests, reworks that when I look at them, my only thought is the same response that a carry farmer gives me if they didn't hear what I just said. While the good and bad reworks are entirely up to your own thoughts on them, I would say reworks like these, the in-betweens for lack of better words, are a mix of both for the strangest possible reasons. And it's much easier to start with an example first, and our final League of Litmus tests is going to involve Aatrox. Old Aatrox was a duelist, focusing on dealing a lot of single target damage through auto attacks, and like Warwick, his gimmick was being a bit of a drain tank, who could also revive himself. Where he differs from the old Warwick though was his role. As a duelist, he only ever wanted 1v1s. The instant you were dealing out in plurals, he wanted none of it. He also differed from Warwick and even other duelists with how he had no built-in protection unless you wanted to count his revive. He wasn't like Jax, who had his counter-strike to completely neuter other auto-attackers, meaning he was an extreme glass cannon. But despite this, you'd think reworking this would be, yeah, a little bit awkward, but definitely doable, while keeping his identity as a glass cannon healing machine alive, right? The only similarities between these two characters is that their Qs knock up people, and they have the same birth certificate. New Aatrox is a perfect example of a rework, just because the resulting character it's not bad, not at all. This is a good, solid design. It's just that they took the old character and nearly got rid of the entire thing, completely leaving old Aatrox players in the dust. Now this differs from Skarner, as he retained the major elements of his previous version, his iconic kidnapping ultimate, the overall Scorpion design. It all stayed intact as the same character, so it didn't completely ditch his old player base in the same way that the Aatrox rework did. Yes, new and old Aatrox visually look very similar, the same way that my twin dogs look very similar until I put on my glasses.
Oh, that's a pipe bomb.
New Aatrox is fundamentally a different character from the old one, and while this new character is designed in a better way and is overall a healthier character for the game in my opinion, even if it did take a while to get to this point, it doesn't change the fact that as a rework, it doesn't do anything that the good ones does. His old playstyle is gone, his players are left by the wayside, and of course, no one asked for this creation to be the result of the rework. But even then, it's not like he's got the horrendous elements that you would typically associate with it, it's what no one wanted. The end product, while still a great character in the eyes of many, including myself, does make you wonder what could have been when you look at this previous version. If you want to learn more about this rework, I highly suggest Exil's video covering his full history, which I'll leave a link to. It's an absolute banger.
Would you believe me if I said I don't play this game much anymore? So that was a lot of setup, but now we can talk about other reworks. I've got this list of games just here that I know people would love to hear about, so let's just see what we're working with. We've got Overwatch. Overwatch if it was horny. And Overwatch if it was boring, and Overwatch if SK made it. So I guess I'll talk about Paladins.
Paladins, this game's pretty fun. I only just got into it again within the last couple months, so I'm not the most experienced player in the world, but honestly I love some of these characters. Maeve, Eevee, Koga, they're all my beloveds when I queue up, but you know something else? Paladin's style of DPS character designs are actually really cool to me. Being separated into flanks and damage is a cool choice that I like quite a lot. I mean, it gives clear goals when creating a character, and if you need to rework them, you know the constraint that you're dealing with. A damage character is going to be more focused on trying to break through the front line, while a flank would be more focused on trying to break through the back line, meaning that they want different tools for the job. I mean, look at Tiberius. While this is much closer to a mini rework rather than a full-scale overhaul, it's really well done. Making him feel more fluid by reducing the startup on his pounce, so invulnerability on landing as well is very nice, but these aren't enough to be considered a rework. Where the big changes lie are in his talents, the pickable passives that all the characters have. Previously, his talent, Predatory Instincts, used to let Chakram bounce 2 more times. Boring, terrible, and got added into his kit with this rework. The new version, eliminations during combat trance reduce its cooldown by 25%. Now, in general, Vicious Assault is still probably his best. If anything, it's probably even better thanks to the rework granting him an additional 40% damage reduction while airborne during Crouching Tigron, but the combat trance talent is really intuitive. This mini rework, beautiful. The previous iteration of Tiberius was a little bit clunky to me. He didn't feel very smooth to control, largely thanks to his dash taking half a second to start up, which doesn't sound like much, but you'd really notice it in fast-paced games like this. It was why I wasn't the biggest fan of him before, and it makes him a lot better suited as a more mid to frontline damage dealer, especially with the new bounces, invulnerability on landing, and the possible 40% damage reduction with Vicious Assault. Smaller scale reworks like this tend to be a lot easier to succeed with, as it's only 1, maybe 2 core issues within the character that you need to fix. And I mean, this Tiberius rework was pretty recent. I wonder if there were any other reworks before him. I mean, if Hi-Rez can make a character feel so much better to play with just a couple small changes, I wonder what they could do with bigger ones. Is it possible to unspeak a sentence?
Tell me, what changes do you think were made to this girl? This character who was previously a flank, the one who could do 1000 damage bursts. Unless you play paladins, your answer is wrong, they turned her into a support. Now Moji never interested me much. Back when she was a flank character, she didn't have the same feeling mobility as the other paladins characters that I play have. I tend to prefer a little more verticality in my movement, so I was never the biggest fan. But that doesn't change the fact that when I booted up paladins one day, I was surprised to see her completely absent from the flank section. I thought she was bugs, taken out to be fixed, but that wasn't it exactly. What had actually happened was that they took her out back. Role reworks. These are extremely contentious and an absolute balancing act and a half, which unfortunately, the majority of the time at least, will always result in players being unhappy. I am not talking about you again though. A split player base is one of the worst possible results a rework could have, as seen with Aatrox in League, but in his case he remains as a top laner, so he's still within his role. When you rework a character into a new role, it could alienate players even more. People gravitate towards a style of certain roles for various reasons, naturally also meaning that they gravitate to certain characters within those roles, as the role itself creates the style which the character uses as a baseline. Obviously, not true in every single case, but it's the typical way that people will come about the role they want to play. I usually like some funky mobility and strange weapon types, so DPS is usually the role I gravitate towards to the most in a hero shooter like this. But if a character I love was changed from DPS to support, they could end up losing a lot of that spark that made me want to play them. And this Moji rework was just that for a lot of Moji players. From what I was able to find, she was reworked due to the fact that she performed badly in high level play and would perform too well in low level play, meaning she always had to be nerfed into a state of weakness. But if that's her problem, why rework her in this way? Because she still retains her same problems, just in a new support flavor. Like if I put a load of strawberry flavoring powder into milk that went off 3 months ago, sure it might taste sweeter now, but you're gonna get sick if you drink it. She lost some of her tech, such as bunny hopping with Scamper, now that the timer has been removed. Naturally as well, she lost a portion of her damage. Previously she could do up to 1000 in a burst thanks to her magic marks, but by default, magic marks don't affect enemies anymore unless you take her new talent which allows this to happen, but even then, the damage naturally won't rival the previous version. Her previous issues stemmed from frustrations, primarily her volatility that depended on skill level, either being frustrating for their team at higher levels, as unless this Moji player was maximizing everything, she just wasn't providing much, while at lower levels, she would frustrate enemies because she could do too much. Is it a skill issue? Yes. Sure, it can be argued as such, but it's also a design issue. However, this could be fixed with careful changes, though instead, Hi-Rez said makeover time. The new Moji suffers from a lack of range, which isn't an issue by itself. The old Moji also didn't have good range either, but it becomes an issue when we look at the rest of her kit. To begin with, her hitbox is huge. Even with a buffed health pool, if you're out of her short breath range, she cannot interact with you meaningfully, whether you're an ally or an enemy, which is a lot more critical on the enemy side, since when you look at the hitbox she has, she's so easy to hit. But, to be fair, she does have infinite scamper, meaning that she can close distances a lot easier. So what's the real issue? Survivability. As a flank, her survivability was a lot higher, thanks to her old magic shield, which made her invulnerable for a short time, while also applying a mark onto enemies, allowing her to turn her defense into an offense. As a support, this has been changed to give a shield to her and any allies within range over 2 seconds, losing its secondary mark effect as well. And of course, this shield has easy counterplay thanks to the Wrecker purchase, increasing damage versus shields. And her ult? Very situational. She can't use the ult as effectively as before. Trying to pick off an important target before the fight starts, good luck getting in and out alive. The best use case for it now is as a peel tool when a flanker tries to take you or part of your backline out, which is certainly useful, but it's just more limited compared to before. Old Moji could do this as well. The Moji rework is both an absolute and a rework done in bad taste, completely altering a character whose issues were nowhere near dire enough to warrant a rework, which also acts as an insult to the players who are dedicated to her original style.
Well, that marks our worship was horny off the list. That means my options are to make people angry, or make a joke with so many layers that only 7 people will understand. So Overwatch made by Disgaea it is.
Guilty Gear, one of the premier anime fighting games, perfect for a guy like me you'd think. I mean, I have a Haikyuu poster and 2 monitors.
You'd think.
Yeah, fighting games were never really my thing. I do love Smash Bros, but I also only play Kirby, so you know I'm just a great fun at parties. But I've always been interested in them, not in the events or the high-level gameplay as much as I would be in other games, but in the really unique content that spawns out of them. I have never touched Street Fighter in my life, but when Leon Massey calls, I answer.
What do you mean an hour-long video on skateboards?
But for a while, I had been looking at Guilty Gear Strive. Its visual style had caught my eye, and the majority of the community seemed pretty chill. The characters looked really interesting, and I knew it was one of the easier fighting games to get into. However, a traditional fighting game is still a traditional fighting game. It was an entirely new genre to me, requiring a full new set of mechanics to be developed from the ground up. Do you think these hands can do motion inputs? So I always put it off, just enjoying random pieces from the sidelines. Until Pyra joined the Discord and my streams telling me that I should play it every day for a week. Yeah, I caved. It had been something that I wanted to do for a while, so I thought, feck it. And that brings us to now. I am only capable of playing Giovanna, and even then I cannot perform her supers in 90% of situations. Motion inputs are my enemy, but what does this have to do with Reworks? Elfelt Valentine. Valentine. I don't know. You know the Discord member I was on about a moment ago, Pyra? She asked to 1v1 me when I was playing the game for the very first time on stream, which is actually what you'll see if you search up the definition for mistake in the dictionary. I got absolutely destroyed, especially by her Elfelt pick, so I decided to look up some information on her. But I was confused. Some images had her in a bridal dress and bunny ears. This wasn't the Elfelt who just destroyed me, at which point I remembered there's previous versions of Guilty Gear and I should probably add Strive to my search. I did, which landed me into a Reddit thread filled with buzzwords that I didn't understand. It's baby's first fighting game, how am I supposed to know what a Rekka is? All this confusion led me to a friend of mine who is a fighting game encyclopedia. She explained things and I finally understood. But then I decided to probe deeper, ask her what the differences were between Elfelt and Strive and Xrd, since I barely knew the game differences to begin with, and I am the very definition of a curious bastard. And good god, there are differences. It also turned into a sales pitch midway, which 37 hours later turned into Guilty Gear XX Accent Core plus or being added to my Steam library, you sly dog! Elfelt was effectively reworked moving into Strive, as Strive itself could be described as the rework of the Guilty Gear series, since it had been simplified quite a bit to try and invite new players to give it a try. And if I may use Ruby's words, it's like Street Fighter with an air dash in terms of footsies, which was very different from Xrd, which is faster movement and bigger jumps. While the new Elfelt is mainly focused on her Rekka, which for anyone who's like me, is a special move with multiple follow-ups that you can also just choose to not do, which I simplified down to combo the move, which is probably wrong in my thought process, but sure luck will be grand. The reason I wanted to bring this up is quite simple. I am enjoying Guilty Gear Strive a lot, except for when I get put up against this fan-wielding creature of a man, I have no idea what he does. And I wanted an excuse to talk about it, but I know nowhere near enough to actually talk about it meaningfully, so instead I just wanted to bring this up. I find it cool how they change characters to fit a new direction that a different game entry is heading in. I can't comment on if this rework Elfelt got to help her move into Strive is good, bad, they're fundamentally different games. But what I can say is that I do think it's pretty cool how fighting game character gets changed while being brought into a new entry within the series, especially when said entry doesn't include a random tripping mechanic. You know, while on the topic of games that I don't really know that well, Rainbow Six Siege. I don't actually play this game. I have friends who do, and in fact the extent of my knowledge on Rainbow Six is that these letters, in this order, piss people off. Sometimes I cover games that I don't know much about, provided that I find at least some aspect of them interesting, and in the process I also try to inform myself with my own research on the game, while also getting information off of others with more experience. And the reason I'm bringing this all up is apparently Rainbow Six is getting some massive update with like 10 reworks in it, but I truly do not know enough to feel like I could do it justice, so I think I'll just leave this one to the people on my computer who talk to me sometimes after I talk about video games.
Well, that's enough proving that I actually know about games outside the live service landscape, so let's return to the list to see what we've got. And there's two options left. It's either Overwatch or the other one. And only one of these has Sonic if he was a blue-haired Filipino girl, so I kinda have to talk about it first.
Valorant. Honestly, this game doesn't really do traditional reworks. Whenever a character is problematic thanks to being too strong, they take them out of the role that they were originally in and rework them into a McDonald's employee by nerfing them so hard they end up with shares in the company. Now, there's only been one real rework in Valorant, belonging to Yoru, but damn it, I gotta find a way to shoehorn Neon into this video, so we're gonna be talking about the two of them. So we may as well open with the fraudulent statements first so that people know that I shouldn't actually be playing this game. I love Neon. She is my favorite agent by far, entirely because she makes my Overwatch-riddled brain feel funny. And while she got some changes a while ago that would certainly count as just buffs, it was basically a rework to me as it unlocked an even more fun style of Neon, allowing me to actually run in and ask questions later, instead of running in and having my team ask questions directed at my corpse. Were these changes good?
As a biased individual, I cannot answer this question without a lawyer, or at minimum, my mother present.
The big thing from these changes were to her E, both the sprint and the dash. It was changed to have more uptime, letting it recharge faster faster when not being used, and of course, slide, receiving 2 charges on slide alongside the reduced time it now takes her to pull out her gun during the slide animation, which was also given damn near perfect accuracy during it. The big thing from these changes were to her E, the sprint and the dash. It was changed to have more uptime, letting it recharge faster when not being used, and of course, slide, receiving 2 charges on slide alongside the reduced time it now takes her to pull out her gun during the slide animation, which was also given damn near perfect accuracy on just every single gun in the game as she slides. Realistically, I find these changes, this mini rework as I'm coining it, entirely is an excuse to talk about Neon, kinda dumb. On the same patch they were released, Ray's got her satchel jumps nerfed as they disrupted the tactical flow of the game.
And me having a slip and slide that grants perfect accuracy doesn't?
As I am what most Valorant players would call a Satanist, I love these changes, but I think it's certainly deserving of a huh? Because Neon didn't really need changes as massive as these. Smaller scale buffs would have done her fine, but honestly it makes the game way more fun to me, so I won't complain about their existence. But you know what deserves nothing but a good job, Riot? Yoru's rework. Yoru was advertised as a bit of a sneaky character, tricking his opponents by making it so that they're never sure where he actually is. How do they do that? Badly. Yoru's kit consisted of a teleport, a flashbang, a weird invisible ult, and footstep sounds on release, and people realized pretty quickly, this kinda sucks. He was supposed to trick opponents, but the tools available to him at best would just trick his teammates into thinking that Yoru was a good character if the person on him knew how to aim. As a duelist, his job was to entry onto sites, but his tools just weren't good enough for the job. Jet and Raze had faster movement, alongside smokes, or a boombot to help them open up fights. Phoenix had his wall and curving flash. Ruina could heal up after getting a pick or reposition unharmed after blinding the entire area with her eye. But Yoru? Well, the flashbang was nice, his ultimate was grand, and the TP was okay, but the real crux of his kit was his footsteps. Yoru could place down fake footsteps, which sounds like a great idea, but I want you to think for 2 seconds about the average Valorant player. The vast majority, if they're doing something important, they're going to be shift walking, and if they're committing to an entry, you already know that, because stealth goes out the window as they use all of their util and run in. And when defending, ignoring how a lot of them are listening to music or engaging in acts that I don't even want to describe that involve an object that starts with love and rhymes with fence, do you know what most people are most likely to think when it comes to they're coming to this site, guys? A single set of footsteps they're hearing, or a mass amount of rainbow colored smokes that the site gets covered in? Which one is going to set off more alarm bells? Also, something extra about the footsteps is how they could be faked to begin with. Sure, Yoru could let you fake footsteps in one area while having all 5 players in a different area, but how often were either of those cases happening? Visuals are much better than audio if you're trying to trick players. Audio is absolutely, extremely important. I'm not saying that it isn't, but if all you have is fake footsteps, you're going to be just worse at faking A and rushing B if you compare it to an A fake using smokes, a wall, or even a flash. Recognizing this, alongside his pitiful win rate and play rate, he got booked in for a rework. His core stayed in place, the ultimate and flash are essentially the same, and the big adjustments were to gate crash and decoy. The TP gained an extra charge alongside the great addition of faking the TP. This serves 2 purposes, one being a great way to trick people. It's a loud, unique noise that people notice, so you can make them think that the TP was taken, but that's not the only option. You can also fake it, so that you can place another TP in a different position, which is why I prefer this as a concept of tricking people with sound, as not only is it more noticeable, but it's also multi-purpose. But of course, the big thing in this rework was clone. Yoru places down a clone which runs in a straight line, and if it gets shot at all, it turns in the direction of the bullet and flashes the enemies. This right here is a clone character done right, and I absolutely love it. Clone characters are some of my favorite characters to play. I mean,
why do you think there's 2 of me?
This rework was brilliantly executed. It actually turns Yoru into a character where you always question, is he here? Is he there? Is that the real one?
It lets him live up to the trickery he was designed to do in the first place. It lets him act as an entering duelist in a much more satisfying way. You can fake being a clone and walk straight to the back of sight. You can throw in a flash and TP behind. You can use your ults to get into such a strange position they would never expect. I love this design so much. It broke the dimensional rift and created a second version of me. Well, there's only one game left on the list. It's time to go back to the original hyperfixation. It always comes back to you, doesn't it?
Overwatch. I'm known for talking about this game just a little bit, and it's had its fair share of reworks, especially in Overwatch 2, so there's gotta be something for me to talk about. Let's see. I've done you, Did you, and you. I can't do you again. I value my life. Lads, there's gotta be something here. Can't do you. You're a different story entirely. Oh yeah, you know what? These two work. These are two of the strangest reworks in this game's history, so we may as well open up with the old. Torbjorn. I used to be quite the menace on this character. I don't mean in ranked or anything, I'm talking about a much more serious environment. Irish Overwatch pugs.
Anyone see the Torb?
No, but he died.
He's right on me, by the way.
Alright, never mind, he didn't die.
He killed you? No!
What did I say? Where's the Torb? He died! He's on me!
That's triggered the PTSD of at least 3 of my friends. But I was only ever a menace on post-rework Torb. Pre-rework, well, I was 12 years old, I didn't know what I was doing, and I played the game with my sensitivity at 20, so I wasn't terribly conscious back then. But as a result of that lack of ability to think, it did mean that I actually played him quite a bit. Old Torb was your classic turret user, and is a good example of the old Overwatch DPS design, with the DPS characters losing out on a slight bit of damage in exchange for more utility. Now, in fairness, this was because there were 2 classes of DPS, offense and defense, which were the most pointless labels ever, but I digress. Old Torb had 3 levels to his turret, alongside armor packs that he would generate by picking up scrap that came from the deaths of teammates, enemies, or his turret. Turrets would start at level 1, and it could be built up to level 2 if they were smacked a couple times, and would become level 3 during Torb's ultimate, the Molten Core, which gave him a lot of bonus armor, increased his attack speed, alongside making the turret big. In comparison to the present, his damage overall was lower by himself. He had lower attack speed on his rivet gun, but his turret having 300 HP instead of 250 and being able to provide armor packs to his team evened it out. Though of course his old turret required a lot more investment, since at level 1 it wasn't exactly doing numbers. Naturally, Torb was on the more unpopular end. That's a given with a slower paced character in a fast paced game like Overwatch, but it also comes from the classic skill conundrum. Torb's skill floor is low. That's a given when a character has a good chunk of their power budget put towards the game playing itself. The aspect of Torb that gave him a high skill ceiling to work towards was his primary fire projectile, considering it was a very unique projectile as far as they go in Overwatch, being on the slower end and having a bit of an arc to it. Now, if that's all it was, there wouldn't have been much of an issue. The big thing was how in lower elos, he tore things up because people couldn't comprehend that they need to shoot the turret, and in higher elos, turret would be dead within seconds, rendering him much weaker, but if that's all his problem was, Torb would have been reworked way earlier into Overwatch's life.
Alright, listen lads, I don't have many animals in my house, so this is the closest that we're gonna get. It's time to talk about goats.
I have talked about this comp at length enough times to know that I do not want to talk about it anymore, so all we need to know is 3 tanks, 3 supports, and a lot of armor. Torb was reworked in the middle of GOATs, and that fact is the worst part about it. When you look at it, it seems like he got reworked in order to increase his offensive potential, since out of the whole defense hero cast, he really was only useful in the vast majority of cases on defense. There were smaller changes, like to his rivet gun increasing its reload speed and projectile speed, and some other pieces, but that pales in comparison to the real changes. Turret no longer has levels. Torb could just throw it down and it would automatically build itself up to a level 2 turret, though the HP was lower. Armor packs were replaced by his old ultimate, though it was scaled down, granting less bonus armor and no longer upgrading his turret. Scrap was also scrapped, and his ultimate, still called Molten Core, was changed to allow him to shoot out lava that deals damage when stepped on, and the important thing to note is that it deals bonus damage to armored targets. Do you see the issue that we have now? Looking at these changes and the time that they were in, it seems that Torb was reworked as a method of creating a counter to goats, which at the time was so dominant, the best counter was more goats. In a vacuum, I personally think it's a good rework. The new Torb was a lot more fun, a lot more active and engaging since you were spending less time building up that turret to make it a threat, or not begging for an Orisa to babysit your turret anymore. Yet a lot of Torb players were not happy with it, and justifiably so. A lot of them stemming from a dislike of the new ultimate, mainly thanks to the fact that his original design, that of the builder character, was thrown to the side in favour of this more effectively spam-oriented style. No explicit message was given to the community about the direction that this rework wished to go, which left us at the answer of, I guess he's just a ghost counter now, since all we had to work with was that new ultimate. Looking at the full picture, it's hard to say if this rework was good or bad. I like it, but also I feel very bad for the old Torb players, so I think that makes it the perfect Huh? And to me, that's all because reworking a character in order to turn them into a counter for a strategy is just as bad as creating a new character to act as a counter to a strategy, which we have already seen fully in practice in this game, because that exact character and design philosophy is why we were dealing with Ghost in the first place, and it was also his daughter, so maybe it just runs in the family.
Runs in the family, you see. We all pop into existence as nothing but a means to an end, the end in this case being a complete stop or hindrance to one specific thing. For example, I only exist to stop him. Back in Overwatch 1, I was quite the Doomfist enjoyer. He was never my most played, since I primarily played in scrim environments and never got many opportunities to pull him out, but he was still my go-to hero for stall situations. Even outside of those, I enjoyed him quite a lot. The Combo Master gameplay loop he had was incredibly fun to me, even if I played him at a lower skill level than the other characters I enjoyed, like Genji, Tracer, and Pharah. But come Overwatch 2, the DPS Doomfist design was not gonna work. They were cutting down on hard CC, which Doom had a plentiful amount of, but the only way to try keep him alive was by moving him to the tank role, where the crowd control he had would be better suited. You can't remove the CC from Doom. It's been tried before and failed horrendously, so instead they opt for what looks like at first the safer route, changing his fundamental role to allow for that CC to exist. Though in doing this, you leave behind his previous identity of being an arcade fighting game character within an FPS. And I want to mention that even then, the closest he's ever been to a fighting game character was with Uppercut in Overwatch 1. And lads, having a Shoryuken does not make you a fighting game character. I know it was the goal the devs had when making him, but you can see where that landed us in the first place. A quick rundown on old Doom. His passive gave him some bonus temporary shields when damaging enemies, and his hand cannon was a shotgun type of projectile. Rocket Punch, a charge of ability that could one-shot a 250 HP hero if they hit a wall, and Seismic Slam, an ability with a targeted or free target version, which ramped up in damage until you hit the floor to a cap of 125. And Rising Uppercut, one of the two abilities designed to launch characters straight up in the air, the only other one being Piledriver. It locked enemy movement for 0.6 seconds as they rose, and of course, old Meteor Strike. It's the exact same massive slam into the ground that we currently have, only I'm actually threatened by this Overwatch 1 version. There was a lot of crowd control within the old Doomfist, and all of this is ignoring how trying to add a fighting game character to an FPS is a very difficult endeavor. I mean, it's a given since this type of character is kind of missing the shooter part of the first-person shooter. So Tank Doom, the passive and primary fire are basically the same, just some number adjustments. Slam was changed to have fixed damage, and it also acts like the free targeted version it previously had, except they took the movement it gave and cranked it up to 11. Rocket Punch is similar enough as well, just doing less damage and having less of a stun, but now it also has an AoE effect, meaning that it can punch extra targets if they're close to the original one. It also has an empowered version, which leads it to Power Block, otherwise known as my college thesis. Replacing Uppercut, Power Block gives Doomfist 80% damage reduction from the front, and if he blocks 100 damage, which is technically wrong, but we're not going to get into the maths of it, Rocket Punch gains Empowerment, increasing damage and the distance that Doom travels, also increasing the distance that the target travels, a higher stun time on the target if they hit the wall, and it has an increased AoE. Finally, Meteor Strike is like a neutered version of the previous one, doing less damage in the outer ring, slowing enemies hit, and also granting Doom increased cooldown reduction and healing while in the sky. It also doesn't look as nice now visually, but that may just be me. Overall, this rework is honestly a healthier design for Doomfist in my opinion, even if I don't enjoy him as much as a tank and prefer to play the DPS version. However, It's time for me to bitch.
for something small, which Cream mentioned in his video on Doomfist, and I demand that you watch it, it is incredible, Seismic Slam lacks impact. It lacks something that makes it feel like it was actually used. It used to have a slow, but that proved to be way too frustrating to play against, so it was removed. But there's something even smaller that just irks me, and I don't even play Doom enough to notice it frequently. Why does Slam do this? It's so inconsistent as to if it will or won't travel up objects. Like, it can go up this car, I just need to be at the correct angle. Why? Why can't it just go up the car? In general, the damage on Slam is also a little bit pitiful, but we'll come back to that, because the real elephant in the room is Power Block and Rocket Punch, specifically Empowered Punch and the process of gaining empowerment. This ability just doesn't really feel too good. It feels bad for the Doom player, since if no one shoots you, you're now just in a staring contest, but it also feels bad when playing against Doom thanks to the 4 Neanderthals on your team feeding him with bullets. It doesn't feel good to get punished for something that you had no control over. There's a comparison I'd like to make between the Power Block and two other similar abilities in Overwatch, Defense Matrix and Zarya Bubbles. Same as Kinetic Grasp as well, to be fair, but let's just stick to these two for now. All three of these abilities, Block, Matrix and Bubbles, share the same weakness. If they're not shot at, they get no value. However, Bubble and Matrix differ from Power Block in how hard they get punished from not being shot. Let's look at Diva first. Matrix operates on a resource meter and has a low cooldown provided you have the resource. If Diva matrixes and doesn't get shot at, she can just stop. She'll have her matrix back up in a second, unlike Doom where Power Block has a static cooldown once it's done being used. There's also the fact that Matrix can be used to help Diva's teammates, it's not strictly for her own protection. And what about Zarya? Well, like Diva, she can help her teammates with bubbles, but another aspect of it is the activeness of Bubble. Sure, Zarya really wants Bubbles to be shot at so that she gains charge to do more damage, but even if Bubbles aren't shot at, Zarya, or the teammate that she used Bubble on, still have full access to their tools so they can still be offensive and apply pressure while being protected. Diva can do this as well with missiles, just to a lesser extent in terms of offensive pressure. Doomfist has neither of these benefits. He can't provide offensive pressure during Power Block, nor can he provide a defensive benefit to his team, since Power Block is restricted to the direction Doom is facing, and he has a hefty enough move speed penalty during it. So it's not like he can just reposition to the front of the team like Diva or Zarya, or even a Sigma and a Rissa could. And as for the state of empowerment itself, well, first let me say that I love empowered abilities. Pantheon and Rengar in League are two of my favorite characters to play, but their empowerment is built across their entire kit, meaning they have a choice to make in regards to which version of their abilities they want to use. Doomfist doesn't have this choice as he's only got Empowered Punch, and with the majority of Doom's power riding within Punch to begin with, he really wants Empowered Punch as much as possible so that he can fist you into next week, considering that a stock punch by itself, while threatening enough, needs too many factors to reach the same power as other tank abilities. Let's look at Rein Fire Strike. It's always 120 damage, it's only a minor wind up, and sure it's a projectile, but you're not going to miss that in melee range where Rein is usually fighting. Doom Punch on the other hand, not only does it not have nearly the same consistency, and we're not going to get into the Ghost Punch discussions, even if it does have the potential to do more than Fire Strike, whether or not it's empowered thanks to the stun that it has. But why do I bring all of this up? Because empowerment doesn't really feel like a tank empowerment. During beta and on release, empowerment was like the way to get the old Doomfist punch back, one-shotting squishy heroes, but its damage has been nerfed since then, and rightfully so, as one-shots, I mean, I've discussed at length the problems I have with them. A suggestion from Scream was to add more to the stun to give empowerment that impact that it used to have, which I fully agree with, given how you really expect a fully charged punch that slams you into a wall to disable you a lot more than it currently does. But that was before the Season 9 changes, which have since increased the damage on Empowered Punch, helping the point of Doom's empowerment feeling underwhelming compared to other tank abilities, which is nearly non-existent now, but that's only on the damage front. It feels much nicer for the punch to have that impact, to have that damage, but something about adding more damage over utility to a tank bugs me at least a little bit. But anyway, despite this, I also have a suggestion of my own, stemming from the empowered characters I named just a moment ago. What if empowerment affected Slam? Many Doom players have said that new Slam is just kinda underwhelming, and it really is. But if Slam could also be empowered, could that fix it? An empowered Slam could reintroduce the old slow that it used to have, maybe to a lesser extent, so it could still exist. And it could even add to the damage that it deals overall, say an increase to 75 from 50. Granted, this actually limits possibilities instead of creating new ones. Like if you want to empowered Slam, you can't punch to get into a better position to use it. You have to go in raw for lack of better words. So while I liked this idea at first when it popped into my mind, it's not as good as it seems on paper, but I wanted to let it be known anyway. You know something though? There was a brief period where I actually did enjoy Tank Doomfist. Right back in the beta, when he had some insane text that made his movement laugh in the face of DPS Doom. However, these were patched out and then re-added in a way that didn't mirror how they were before, meaning that these texts are effectively lost to time unless you want to use a very strange, buggy feeling version. Get Quakedown puts this in a much cleaner way, and this quote is coming from Cream's video.
You might say Doomfist's movement was broken in the beta, but the movement that Doomfist can do in the beta is the movement he can still do now. It's just much more clunkier to execute, and you have to actively fight against map geometry to execute these texts. You need to be hyper aware of map geometry now, or else you get screwed over by it.
The removal of these texts, which I should say I was never the best at, but regardless they were fun to execute, really took the fun out of Doom for me, especially with Uppercut now being missing. I'm certainly not saying that Uppercut was a healthy ability, it was just a fun one, I just have my biases towards it. But this tech discussion leads us to the bigger problem that Doom has, regardless of version: bugs. I don't think any character in Overwatch has rivaled the amount of bugs that Doomfist has had throughout his time in the game. Oh, how many bugs? How about this 35-page, 11,000 word long document detailing each and every one of them? I'm pretty sure if the bugs were focused in on and dealt with, half the frustrations of Doom could be fixed.
Do I like this character or not? Jesus.
Overall, Doomfist Rework is definitely one of the strangest ones that I have discussed so far. I like the concept of it. I find it to be healthier in the Overwatch 2 environment compared to DPS Doom, though functionally I prefer to play DPS Doom. But when it comes to playing against a Doomfist, it makes me question if the concept is as sound as I think it is, because it feels like this rework dumbed down Doomfist. Previously, as a DPS Doom, if you made a positional mistake, you were dying 99 times out of 100. For a modern example, we can look at Venture, who's like the Overwatch 2 version of old Doomfist. If you're caught out, you're going to die for it. But if you make that same error as Tank Doom, if you're caught out of position with no movement options, well, Power Block acts as a way to stall to get your cooldowns back up, which enemies can't do much about, unless they have you surrounded on all sides, or have some kind of hard CC to stop your block. When I think about that, alongside the other struggles that Power Block brings, I hesitate to call it a good rework and lean towards bad. I mean, you effectively get rewarded for poor play. Meanwhile, the old Doom would get his account banned if he didn't play at 110%. With this being made even worse thanks to the removal of text after the rework was received, making it so that the barrier between good and bad Doomfist gets even lower.
But when I look at all these things combined, it makes me realize something. How good or bad a rework is entirely subjective. Some people will adore the new character that gets brought forward, while others are going to miss how the old character they loved has had their playstyle erased. The rework could be a massive improvement in terms of health for the game, but the entire community could be appalled by it. So at the end of the day, you need to look at these reworks for yourself and decide what you think about them. Don't just take what the guy with 2 monitors says as a complete fact. But saying that will be seen as character development, and we can't have that. So Doomfist rework gets a what the hell am I doing with my life out of overly dramatic pun-based title made using old spaghetti western film. When a character, an entire segment of your game, isn't up to snuff, it can be a good thing to accept that in their current state they may not be healthy, and that what you actually want to do is take them back into the workshop to try and create a new and improved version of their kit so that you can breathe new life into the character. It can make community perspective do a complete 180, though unfortunately that works both ways. Not all reworks turn out perfect, but in most cases they come out with positive results. That must be my birth cert. They finally finished the rework. Let's see what changes were made. Got a delivery for a PixelRory? That would be me. Alright, let's see. What change they make to my rework? Huh?
Hello, this video was a lot different than usual, but it was fun to make. If you enjoy this in comparison to my other videos, please let me know with a comment or something, because this video alone just cost me over €200, so I'd really like for it to be worth it. And also, I think I'm allowed to do a little bit of plugging here because of that. I have channel memberships with benefits like a special chat in the Discord, early access to videos, and some behind the scenes type footage, so if that interests you, we have support tiers for it. I also stream on Twitch sometimes, so if you want to say hi, you know where to go. And finally, I have a Twitter and Discord, both linked below as well, and you can get the story by now. Hopefully you enjoyed, and I'll talk to you next time, lads.